This story is a work of fiction, inspired by real events. Names, dates, locations, and identifying details have been changed or dramatized to protect privacy and enhance the narrative. Any resemblance to actual persons, living or dead, is purely coincidental or used fictitiously. This content is intended for entertainment and educational purposes only. It does not aim to glorify crime, promote violence, or pass judgment on real individuals. Viewer discretion is advised. Some scenes may contain mature, disturbing, or triggering content. What you are about to watch could have happened anywhere, to anyone. It's inspired by real events. Whispers of truth, buried beneath layers of fiction. We've changed the names, the dates, the locations, but the emotions, the betrayal, the fear, those are real. This story is not meant to accuse, only to reveal, to make you question, who do you really trust? If stories like this keep you thinking, long after they end, hit subscribe, smash like, and drop your theory in the comments. Now watch closely, before the truth disappears again.
June 14, 2019. Just after midnight, a 911 call came from Maplewood Drive, a quiet Florida street where nights usually ended in porch lights glowing and air conditioners humming. The caller's voice shook as she told dispatch she had heard a woman shouting, sharp and desperate, then silence so sudden it pressed against her chest. Outside, the neighborhood looked calm, cars parked neatly in driveways, curtains drawn tight, a dog barking once before settling again. But one house stood out. Its front door hung slightly open. A light inside flicked off, then back on, as if someone's hand had trembled at the switch. Minutes later, headlights paused at the corner, the engine idling too long before fading into the night. When officers arrived, they moved carefully, flashlights cutting across lawns and hedges. Curtains stirred as neighbors peeked through blinds, whispering to one another, each afraid to guess what might have happened. For them, it felt wrong, as if the usual rhythm of their street had been broken in an instant. What no one yet knew was that inside that house lay a scene shaped not by chance, but by something darker, a tangle of jealousy, possession, and rage. By sunrise, crime scene tape would close off Maplewood Drive, and rumors would rush through the community. But in those early hours, one question carried heavier than all the rest. What really happened inside that house after midnight? Her name was Rachel Monroe, 30 years old, a bartender known for her easy warmth and quick wit. At the lounge where she worked, she remembered regulars by name, teased strangers into laughter, and poured drinks with the kind of care that made people linger long after closing time. She had a habit of humming as she wiped down glasses, tilting her head when she listened, and leaning across the counter just enough to make each conversation feel personal. Rachel lived alone on Maplewood Drive in a modest house that she filled with small comforts. A stack of notebooks crowded her coffee table, half cocktail recipes, half scribbled thoughts she never shared. A battered paperback stayed on her nightstand, its spine cracked from being read too many times. Her younger brother often dropped by with takeout, sitting across from her as she kicked off her shoes after a long shift. Their mother showed up with groceries, still fussing about whether Rachel was eating properly. To her family, she was dependable, grounded, someone who gave more of herself than she kept. But friends had noticed a change. Rachel had been drawn into something she never asked for, a triangle that brought unease. There was a man, and alongside him, a girlfriend whose presence hovered like a shadow. Rachel didn't talk much about it, but her friends remembered the tension. The long stares across the bar. The arguments that followed outside. One even recalled Rachel admitting she felt watched, though she brushed it off with a smile, the way she always did when she didn't want to worry anyone. Her life was built on simple rhythms, late shifts, family visits, her porch light left glowing through the night. But beneath those rhythms, jealousy had already found its way into her story. And that jealousy would end her life. On June 14, 2019, Rachel Monroe closed the bar earlier than usual. By 10:50 p.m., she was on her way home. At 11:08, her smart lock recorded the door unlocking, the familiar glow of her porch light flickering on. At 11:15, she called her brother. They spoke briefly. Rachel promised to see him and their mom over the weekend. She sounded steady, nothing unusual in her voice. Then the timeline began to fracture. At 11:40, a friend sent a text Rachel read but never answered. At 11:52, her thermostat registered a sudden drop, the kind that came only when a door stayed open too long. At 12:03 a.m. a neighbor walking his dog heard voices, Rachel's, urgent and rising, and another woman's, lower but sharp, words lost in the night air. At 12:06, her porch light clicked off, then back on again, as if switched in panic. When officers entered minutes later, the house felt disturbed. The front door hung open a crack. A glass of water lay tipped on the counter, dripping to the floor. One chair sat angled away from the table, unnatural in a home Rachel kept carefully arranged. On the coffee table, her notebook was open, a fresh page blurred by a handprint pressed too firmly. For anyone else, it might have looked careless. For Rachel, who always wiped counters before bed, who stacked her notebooks neatly, it spoke of intrusion. The forensic sweep revealed sharper truths. Tiny drops of blood marked the hallway, too patterned to be chance. Along the baseboard, a faint smear caught under a flashlight's beam. In the bathroom, a towel balled in the sink reeked of bleach. Damp fibers still clung to traces of red. This was not chaos. It was a deliberate effort to erase, to control, to silence. Detectives noted contradictions. No locks broken. No windows forced. No valuables stolen. Yet the house bore the imprint of someone else's hand, someone who knew how to move through her life without breaking the surface. Even the thermostat told its story, doors opening and closing when Rachel should have been alone. Neighbors added fragments. One insisted a car idled too long at the corner. Another recalled hurried footsteps fading down the street. A third swore nothing unusual happened at all. The contradictions only deepened suspicion. By sunrise, Maplewood Drive was sealed by tape. Officers stood outside Rachel's home, the porch light still burning against the early light. To outsiders, the scene may have looked confusing. But to detectives, the pattern was clear. Accidents leave mess. What they found inside Rachel's house was careful. Forced. Planned. Accidents tell one story. This house told another. In the first days, detectives worked through the theories neighbors clung to. A burglary gone wrong. A prowler slipping through the dark. Anything that meant Rachel had fallen victim to chance. But the evidence rejected each one. Nothing was missing. Her purse still rested by the door. Jewelry untouched. Electronics where they belonged. The locks were intact, the windows unbroken. A burglary without theft was no burglary at all. Then came talk of a suspicious car. One neighbor swore headlights paused near the corner after midnight. Investigators traced every vehicle in the area. Grainy footage revealed delivery vans, shift workers returning home, residents pulling into driveways. Each was cleared. The mysterious car disappeared back into rumor. Another neighbor thought he heard running steps on the sidewalk, uneven and rushed. Questioned again, he admitted he wasn't sure. Fear had filled the silence. The story collapsed. Piece by piece, the outside threats dissolved. No prowler. No thief. No drifter wandering Rachel's block. The house itself gave no signs of invasion. Instead, it showed something subtler, objects touched but not taken, order disrupted but not destroyed. Whoever had been there was not a stranger. Then a friend stepped forward with a memory. Weeks earlier, Rachel had confided she felt uneasy. She mentioned a man she knew, and his girlfriend, how the woman's eyes lingered too long, how arguments followed her presence. Rachel had smiled it off at the time, as she often did when she wanted to shield others from worry. But now, that memory carried new weight. If the door had not been forced, if nothing had been stolen, then the danger was not outside Rachel's home. It was already inside her life. Rachel Monroe's body was carried into the medical examiner's office just before dawn. Under the cold glare of fluorescent light, her story unfolded in silence. The examiner began at her arms. Dark bruises wrapped around them like fingerprints pressed in anger. Across her ribs were faint scrapes, the kind left when someone is shoved hard into a surface. A fracture along her jaw revealed a violent strike. When lividity settled, it showed she had been left on the floor for hours, never moved, never helped. Inside, her body told more. The heart wall bore a deep bruise, proof of force pressed against her chest. Fluids pooled where they did not belong, evidence of compression and struggle. Toxicology showed nothing, no alcohol, no drugs. Rachel had been clear-headed, alert, and painfully aware of every second in her final moments. For her family, this knowledge would cut deepest. Back on Maplewood Drive, the forensic team combed through her home. The sharp smell of bleach hit them first. Under UV light, faint streaks glowed along the hallway wall, blood someone had tried to wipe away. On the kitchen counter, Rachel's fingerprints lay beneath fresher impressions from someone else. Fibers lifted from the rug clung stubbornly to clothing that wasn't hers. The towel in the bathroom sink carried the most damning story. Soaked in bleach, its thread still held Rachel's blood and partial DNA profiles. A veteran technician summed it up simply: you can scrub the walls, but you can't scrub the truth. Detectives shared the results with her family. Her mother listened through tears, clutching a framed photo. Her brother sat rigid, fists clenched, staring at the floor. For them, grief became certainty. Rachel hadn't fallen, hadn't collapsed. She had been forced down, silenced, and left behind. By week's end, every whisper of doubt had hardened into proof. The body spoke. The house spoke. And together, they pointed not to chance, but to someone who carried jealousy like a weapon. With evidence secured, detectives turned to Rachel's circle. Focus narrowed on the man she had known. And more sharply, on his girlfriend. She entered the interrogation room calm, her words practiced. But questions pressed harder, and cracks appeared. Her story shifted. Timelines bent. When asked where she was just after midnight, she hesitated. Her eyes flicked downward, her hands trembled. Phone records showed movement her story couldn't explain. An acquaintance tied to her movements that week was brought in next. His denials came rehearsed, his hands restless on the table. He wouldn't say Rachel's name, wouldn't meet the detective's eyes. Every twitch told its own truth: this was not strength, but fear. The arrests came quickly. The shock spread through the neighborhood. Neighbors who had once whispered about prowlers now faced the truth: Rachel hadn't been killed by a stranger. She had been targeted by jealousy, by a woman who saw her as competition for a man's attention. The first hearings carried a tense quiet. Prosecutors rose and laid out the case. Rachel's injuries, the fingerprints layered over hers, the bleach-soaked towel, the contradictions in the girlfriend's testimony. Piece by piece, they built the story of betrayal and rage. The defense countered, warning the jury about contamination and flaws in digital records. One lawyer suggested fingerprints could have been left weeks earlier, another questioned whether blood patterns were misread. In the gallery, Rachel's family sat through it all. Her mother held a small cross in her hand, lips moving in silent prayer. Her brother never looked away from the accused, his grief sharpened into resolve. When the hearings ended, the judge's gavel fell. There would be a trial. And it would no longer be about whispers or suspicion, it would be about whether jealousy could stand against the weight of evidence. The trial of Rachel Monroe's killer opened under the heavy silence of a Florida courtroom. On one side sat Rachel's family. Her mother holding a rosary so tight the beads left marks in her palm, her brother clutching a folded photo of Rachel as if letting go would be betrayal. Across from them sat the accused, the jealous girlfriend whose rage had turned deadly. She stared down at the defense table, jaw clenched, composure stretched thin. The prosecutor began. He told the jury the case was a staircase, step by step, bruise by bruise, fingerprint by fingerprint, the truth would rise into view. Rachel's life, he said, was stolen not by chance, but by jealousy that had no place in love. Then the defense rose. Their message was simple: be cautious. Do not be swept away by emotion. Evidence can mislead. Science can fail. If doubt remained, the law required acquittal. The medical examiner was called first. He described Rachel's injuries: restraint marks on her arms, a jaw fracture from a blow, chest compression that bruised her heart. He explained lividity. The way her body told them she had been left where she fell, never moved, never helped. The defense tried to suggest alternatives: a fall, CPR efforts gone wrong. But the examiner shook his head. These weren't accidents, he said. His certainty filled the room, and jurors wrote furiously. The digital analyst followed. She explained Rachel's smart lock and thermostat logs: doors opening when she was supposed to be alone, sudden drops in temperature when the front door stood ajar. She pointed to unanswered texts: silence after a phone call with her brother. The defense pushed back. Devices glitch, the attorney argued. A thermostat can't testify. The analyst's reply was firm: it doesn't need to. It records. A juror stopped writing and just stared at her, the weight of the line hanging heavy. Then came the lab technician. He held photos of Rachel's counter, where her fingerprints were pressed beneath newer ones belonging to the accused. He explained how fibers from the rug matched clothing taken from her. And he presented the towel, bleach-soaked, left in the sink, still carrying Rachel's DNA. You can clean a room, he told the jury, but you can't clean away the truth. His words struck with finality, echoing across the gallery. Friends and neighbors stepped forward. One remembered Rachel's porch light, always left on until she returned safely home. Another recalled her admitting unease, how she felt watched by the defendant. A friend broke down on the stand, her voice cracking as she spoke of Rachel's kindness, the way she made people feel seen. The defense tried to chip away, memories clouded by grief, emotions coloring testimony, but the jury listened in silence, their faces taut with focus. The defense countered with vigor. They claimed fibers could have transferred from borrowed clothing, fingerprints might have been weeks old, and DNA can be mishandled in labs. They warned the jury against blind trust in procedures. Their strategy was clear: sow doubt where certainty seemed strong. Closing arguments sharpened the divide. The prosecutor rebuilt the staircase: Rachel walking through her front door, the struggle, the bleach-soaked towel, the jealous motive. He said it plainly: Rachel's life ended because another woman couldn't stand the sight of her. The defense clung to one thread: doubt. If you feel even a shadow of uncertainty, the attorney pleaded, you must not convict. The jury left to deliberate. Hours dragged into silence. When they returned, the foreperson carried a folded slip of paper. The judge asked for the verdict. The room held its breath. The courtroom froze as the clerk read the verdict. Guilty. A pause, then again, louder. Guilty. The word cut through the air like steel. Rachel's mother wept, pressing her rosary to her lips. Her brother clutched Rachel's photo tighter, tears running unchecked as he fixed his stare on the accused. At the defense table, the girlfriend unraveled. Her knuckles whitened against the wood as she whispered, "No," again and again, shaking her head in disbelief. The man at the center of it all sat rigid in the gallery, face pale, his presence a reminder of the toxic triangle that had cost Rachel her life. The co-defendant slumped low, refusing to lift his eyes from the floor. The judge called for order before sentencing. His words carried weight. He spoke of jealousy twisted into violence, of trust shattered, of a crime followed by the cruel attempt to erase truth. The cruelty, he said, was not only in the act itself, but in the effort to scrub it away. Then he delivered the sentence, life in prison without the possibility of parole. The gavel struck once, its echo final. Outside, the community remembered Rachel. Neighbors kept her porch light glowing every evening, a quiet vigil that refused to fade. Flowers gathered on her steps. Children left drawings by her door. Friends spoke of her laugh, her kindness, her habit of humming behind the bar. These small acts became her memorial. Detectives reflected on the case. Every bruise, every fiber, every fingerprint had spoken when Rachel could not. Evidence had become her voice, steady and unshaken in court. Justice had been spoken, but grief remained. A family would carry absence forever, a community would feel the loss each time they passed her home. The verdict belonged to the jury. But it was Rachel Monroe's voice that echoed in it. If Rachel's story moved you, don't let it stop here. Share this video so her voice reaches beyond this courtroom, beyond this town, to remind others how jealousy can turn deadly. Subscribe for more true stories that deserve to be heard, and leave your thoughts in the comments. Every view, every word keeps Rachel's memory alive.